Welcome, dear listener. Take a slow, deep breath and let the day gently fade away. Here, in this quiet moment, you don't need to do anything or be anywhere. Just allow yourself to rest. Tonight, I will share with you a soft, soothing tale, a story about forgotten dreams, about rediscovering the magic we once believed in. Let the sound of my voice guide you into stillness, like rain tapping softly against a window, like pages of an old book turning in the calm of a library. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let yourself drift into a place where stories become dreams, and dreams become a peaceful night as sleep.
In the heart of Portland, Oregon, where the rain painted silver streaks on bookstore windows and coffee shops hummed with quiet conversations, lived a woman named Clara who had forgotten how to dream. At 34, Clara worked as a data analyst for a tech company, spending her days transforming human experiences into numbers and charts. Her apartment was minimalist white walls, a single plant that somehow survived her neglect, and shelves lined not with books, but with self-help guides on productivity and success. She had optimized her life so efficiently that she'd accidentally optimized away everything that made it worth living. Every morning, Clara walked the same route to work, earbuds in, podcast playing, always something about market trends or leadership strategies. She passed the old Riverside Library, a beautiful Carnegie building from 1902 with weathered stone steps and tall windows that caught the morning light like amber. She'd walked past it every day for 3 years and never once looked up. Until the day she dropped her phone. The screen shattered on the library steps, and in the sudden silence, no podcast, no notifications, Clara heard something she hadn't heard in years, the sound of her own breathing. As she knelt to gather the pieces, her eyes drifted up to a small brass plaque beside the library door: "Every story matters. Every dreamer counts." Something inside her chest, something she'd thought had died long ago, stirred. The next morning, Clara found herself standing before the library's heavy oak doors. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, and the air smelled of old paper and possibility. The librarian, an elderly man named Mr. Whitmore with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked up from his desk.
"First time?"
he asked gently. Clara nodded, feeling suddenly foolish.
I don't really read anymore. I mean, not stories. Just reports and articles and..."
"Ah?"
Mr. Whitmore said, understanding immediately.
"You've been feeding your mind, but starving your soul. Happens more often than you'd think."
He stood and beckoned her to follow.
"Come. Let me show you something special."
He led her past the main reading room, past the children's section where a few toddlers were building block towers, down a narrow hallway she never would have noticed. At the end was a door marked simply, "Special Collections." Inside was the most beautiful library Clara had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held books of every size and color, some so old their spines were barely legible, others so new they still had that fresh paper smell. But what made Clara gasp were the books themselves. They seemed to shimmer slightly, as if lit from within.
"These,"
Mr. Whitmore said softly,
"are the lost stories.
Lost stories.
Every story that was never written down. Every dream that was abandoned. Every what if that someone let slip away."
He pulled a slender volume from the shelf. It was bound in deep blue leather with silver clasps.
"This one belonged to a woman who wanted to open a bakery, but became an accountant instead. She used to imagine the recipes she'd create, the community she'd build. When she gave up that dream, the story came here."
Clara's hands trembled as she took the book. The moment her fingers touched the cover, she could smell cinnamon and fresh bread, could hear laughter echoing through a warm kitchen filled with sunlight and hope.
But that's impossible,
she whispered. Mr. Whitmore smiled.
Is it? When you were young, didn't you have dreams that felt so real you could touch them? What happened to those dreams, Clara?
She looked at him sharply. She hadn't told him her name.
I don't know,
she said, and realized it was true. Somewhere between college and career, between optimization and efficiency, she'd lost track of the girl who used to write poetry on napkins and imagine herself living in different cities, speaking different languages, becoming different people.
The thing about lost stories,
Mr. Whitmore said,
is that they're not really lost. They're just waiting for someone to remember them, to believe in them again.
Over the following weeks, Clara found herself returning to the library every day. She read the story of a man who dreamed of building tree houses, another about a woman who wanted to teach children to paint. With each book, she felt something awakening inside her, a warmth, a curiosity, a sense of wonder she thought was gone forever. But it was the book with the golden spine that changed everything. She found it on a Tuesday evening, tucked between a story about underwater cities and another about a traveling circus. The cover was blank except for her own name, written in elegant script, Clara's story. With shaking hands, she opened it. The pages were blank.
I don't understand,
she said to Mr. Whitmore, who had appeared beside her as if from nowhere.
That,
he said gently,
is your lost story. The one you never wrote, the life you never lived, the dreams you never followed.
Clara stared at the empty pages, and suddenly she was crying deep, soul-shaking sobs for all the years she'd spent sleepwalking through her life, for all the dreams she'd traded for security, for all the stories she'd never told.
But I don't remember,
she gasped.
I don't remember what I wanted to be.
Mr. Whitmore placed a weathered hand on her shoulder.
Then perhaps,
he said,
it's time to remember.
That night, Clara sat in her sterile apartment, staring at the blank book. Slowly, hesitantly, she picked up a pen, an old fountain pen she'd kept in a drawer, a relic from college. She pressed it to the first page and began to write.
Once upon a time, there was a girl who believed in magic.
The words flowed like water, like music, like coming home. She wrote about the girl she'd been, the one who collected interesting rocks and named the stars, who believed she could become anything she wanted. She wrote about the woman she'd become, efficient, successful, and hollow. And then, with growing excitement, she wrote about the woman she could still be. As the sun rose, Clara looked up from the book, now half filled with her words, and saw her apartment with new eyes. The white walls weren't minimalist, they were blank canvases. The empty shelves weren't organized, they were waiting. She called in sick to work. Instead, she walked through the city with new eyes, noticing things she'd ignored for years. Street musicians playing for coins and smiles. Artists sketching portraits of strangers. A community garden where neighbors shared vegetables and stories. A little girl feeding pigeons while her grandfather watched with patient love. She sat on a park bench and wrote it all down. Over the following months, Clara's life transformed. She quit her job and started freelancing, choosing projects that interested her rather than ones that paid the most. She painted her walls warm colors and filled her shelves with books, not guides to success, but stories that made her feel alive. She learned to cook, joined a hiking group, started volunteering at the animal shelter. Most importantly, she kept writing. She wrote about the people she met, the places she discovered, the dreams she was finally brave enough to pursue. Her blank book filled page by page with a life worth living. One evening, as autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson, Clara returned to the special collections room. Mr. Whitmore smiled as she approached.
"How's your story coming along?"
he asked. Clara held up her book, now completely filled with her words, her dreams, her newly discovered life.
"I think it's ready."
She placed it gently on the shelf, and for a moment, it seemed to glow with the same inner light as all the others.
"But wait.
Clara said suddenly.
If I put it back, does that mean the story is over? Does it become lost again?"
Mr. Whitmore chuckled, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze.
"Oh, my dear Clara, don't you see? Once a story is truly lived, it can never be lost again. It becomes part of the world, part of everyone whose life it touches. The book on the shelf isn't the end of your story, it's the seed of countless others."
He was right. Clara's transformation had inspired her neighbors, her friends, even strangers she met. Her sister had quit the job she hated to become a teacher. Her neighbor had started painting again. The barista at her coffee shop had enrolled in night school to study literature.
"Every story matters,"
Clara said, reading the plaque she now knew by heart.
"Every dreamer counts."
Mr. Whitmore finished. As Clara walked home through the rain-washed streets of Portland, she realized that the most beautiful truth of all wasn't that she had found her lost story, it was that she was still writing it, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one dream at a time. The city around her pulsed with life, restaurant windows glowing warmly as families shared dinner, couples walking hand in hand under umbrellas, teenagers laughing as they splashed through puddles without care. Each person she passed was writing their own story, whether they knew it or not. The businessman hurrying past with his phone pressed to his ear, perhaps he was the protagonist of a story about learning to slow down. The elderly woman feeding cats behind the flower shop, maybe hers was a tale of quiet kindness that changed the world one small act at a time. Clara pulled her jacket closer against the evening chill and felt the weight of her notebook in her pocket, a new one, leather-bound and ready for tomorrow's adventures. She'd started carrying it everywhere, capturing moments of beauty, overheard conversations, sudden inspirations. Her life had become a collection of small stories, each one precious. At her apartment building, she paused at the mailboxes and noticed something that made her heart warm, a handwritten note tucked under her neighbor's door, folded carefully with obvious care. Clara smiled, remembering the homemade soup she'd brought to Mrs. Chen from 3B when she'd heard her coughing through the thin walls. These small connections, these moments of reaching out, they were all part of the story too. Climbing the stairs to her apartment, Clara thought about all the changes these past months had brought. Her walls, once stark white, now displayed photographs she'd taken around the city and watercolor paintings she'd attempted in her evening art class. Her bookshelf overflowed with novels, poetry collections, and journals from local writers she'd discovered at coffee shop readings. The single surviving plant had been joined by a small garden on her fire escape, herbs and flowers that made her morning coffee taste like possibility. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea and settled into the window seat she'd created with cushions and a soft throw. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, but Clara was no longer just observing, she was participating, contributing her own verse to the great poem of human existence. Opening her notebook, she began to write about her day, the way the barista at her new favorite coffee shop hummed while making drinks, the construction worker who'd helped an elderly man cross the street, the child who'd given her flower to a stranger just because it was beautiful. These weren't dramatic stories, but they were real, and they mattered. As she wrote, Clara thought about Mr. Whitmore and the library of lost stories. She wondered how many other people were walking past that door every day, too busy optimizing their lives to notice the magic waiting just inside. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start a writing group. Nothing fancy, just a few people gathering to share their stories, to remember that their dreams and experiences had value. The rain had stopped, and through her window, Clara could see the first lights beginning to twinkle across the city. Somewhere out there, other people were having their own moments of awakening, finding their own lost stories, choosing courage over comfort. The thought filled her with warmth and purpose. She closed her notebook and smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new stories to discover, new connections to make, new chapters to write. The blank pages of her life stretched ahead, not empty, but full of infinite possibility. And perhaps that's the most important thing to remember. Sometimes we become so focused on optimizing our lives for success that we forget to live them for joy. It's never too late to remember who we dreamed of becoming, and the blank pages of our lives are always waiting for us to fill them with meaning, wonder, and authentic purpose. In a world that often values efficiency over imagination, maybe the greatest rebellion is simply to stop and ask ourselves, what story am I really telling with my life? The answer, like Clara discovered, might be waiting for us in the most unexpected places, sometimes as close as the library we pass every day, or as simple as the dreams we thought we'd lost forever.